Okay, so this morning we're going to follow up on a session that Caroline did 2 or 3 weeks ago for payment arrangements and promises. We're going to look at one script in particular, which is the ap.pa-prom script, which is a script that ships with VimPower Connect. It's found in the templates folder of the install path, and it's also included as part of demo data. So any demo database you open up would already have the ap-prom script already hooked up. It's a general script, and it basically just processes payment arrangement promises. As I said before, this is a script that ships with VimPower Connect. It handles all aspects of payment arrangement promise processing. It most typically runs as part of account processes. It can be run from the process menu on an more ad hoc basis, but most typically run along with the autos. And basically the script will identify and attempt to pass, fail, or break payment promises based on criteria that we define in the script constants and some, obviously, whatever custom criteria we want to define in the script code itself. So looking at the script constants, you can see here that we have, we can do things like setting the number of consecutive fails before a payment promise is deemed to be broken. So again, that's something that we can control just via the constant on the script. And things like setting the number of grace days that a script should wait before checking if promise has been paid. There are also obviously some other constants and things there as well, but we won't spend too much time going through all of them. But we will jump in and see where these are used in the script code itself. So the script itself has been around for a long time and has had a few revisions over the years. It is at its most basic and broken down into 5 different functions. Our main function, and then 4 subsidiary functions that handle the processing of the promises themselves. So in our main function, as I said before, we've just looked at those script constants. It returns the script constants and then handles parameters for account processes. So if it's running with account processes, it'll basically keep account processes notified. So your progress bars and everything keep updated in when running through the account processes. And then it's going to go ahead and do a query. And this query essentially is just going to return all transactions that fall within the correct date range, and also meet the criteria that we've already defined in our constants. So it's basically going to bring back a big list of transactions that are pending promises. From here, it will go ahead and loop through the results. So each of the transactions, it'll load the account, and then it will do a check against our grace days, again setting our constants that we saw earlier, and then it will attempt to process the promise due. Just as you can see here, this makes a call into our process promise due function, which we'll go ahead and have a look at now. And then at the bottom, it just goes ahead and finalizes the notification process for account processes. So process promise due. This function here is basically going to determine whether or not a promise is going to pass or fail, or break, or cancel. The logic for doing so is reasonably straightforward. It's one of these scripts, and the reason for wanting to cover it in today's session is on the face of it can be quite a scary looking script. Used to dread having to make changes to it, but actually when you break it down into its most simple form, processing the promises is as simple as checking the overdue that we're expecting, versus the actual overdue. And if one is higher than the other, then the promise is going to pass or fail. Okay, so as we look through our script here, you can see that the script is going to make a call to the account to get the balance overdue as at the promised grace date. And it's going to use that as our overdue actual figure. So that's going to be our what the overdue actually is. And then we're going to do some jiggery pokery in here to work out what we expect the overdue to be. Now, the overdue expected, as per the script out of the box, is basically the overdue and what's due today at the time of the payment arrangement, less any promises plus any fees. Okay, less this particular promise as well. And then we go ahead and the script makes a bunch of other checks to subtract other promises, sorry, and add any additional overdues. So when all is said and done, at the bottom of this block of logic here, we do our actual test to see whether or not the promises are going to pass or they're going to fail. If our actual overdue is higher than we expected it to be, based on the calculations we've just made above, then the promise is going to fail. We're going to increase our fail count here. And we're then going to do a check to determine whether or not the promise should be broken. So the promise has already failed because of the reason here. And it's now going to determine whether or not we should break the promise. Now, our broken count obviously comes from our script constants. So as you can see, by default, out of the box, allow two broken promises, at which point it's then going to fail. So that is something that could be is likely going to be can be changed up and down, but obviously that's just a simple constant change. From here, we're going to update the promise status. If the fail count is greater, then the promise is broken. Therefore, we will set the promise status on that particular transaction using the transaction PK to be broken. And then we're going to perform some additional processing to go ahead and actually affect things on the broken promise. We'll come back to that in a second. Otherwise, our fail count hasn't exceeded our broken count, so therefore it is just a fail. So if this was the first instance of a failed promise, then that will just go through into here. Obviously, it hasn't broken yet because it hasn't hit our broken count. We'll just fail it. Otherwise, we're going to go through and we'll then, additionally go on and just do some checks to see whether or not the promise that we are processing is the final promise. If it's the final promise in the arrangement and it's failed, then we're going to perform some additional processing here as well. Otherwise, we're going to say that the promise has been paid and therefore is a pass. And that's this little block of logic in here. And again, we're just going to go through, we're going to use this FMBL account transaction functions, update promise status function to update the promise status on our account transaction using the PK, set that to a pass. We're then additionally going to do similar to what we did up here for our fail, our final, we'll do a check and see if it's the final promise. If it's the final promise and it's passed, then we're going to make a call into our function here, process final pass. And finally, if this payment arrangement has been superseded by another one, then we'll simply set the promise status to be cancelled. Okay, so coming back up to here, you can see here that when we've got a broken promise, we're going to call into the function by the same name. And if we look in here, you can see that this out of the box, this function here is basically going to do a check to determine whether or not the payment arrangement is linked to a workflow. If it is, then it's going to process that do some processing on the workflow. It's going to set the workflow for immediate recall. It's going to set it to on hold if it's on hold, and finally it sets a flag on a flag and some flag notes on the workflow itself. Finally, it'll go through and add an account log as well. So out of the box, it's already going to perform those things, but obviously there is a good chance that those actions might might well be wanting to be changed by your clients. I see Adam's chirped up in the chat there with FinBL in proper case. Don't worry, Adam, I'm all over this already. I have made notes to go and hammer development once I'm finished. I couldn't be bothered to go through and change them all, otherwise I'd have done it. But well spotted. Okay, so similarly to dealing with so that's basically our process for dealing with a broken promise. We're going to check, see if there's a workflow. We're going to do some stuff with the workflow, and then we're going to add a log at the end. Yes, I know, Matt. I could have Control-H'd and replaced all, but I figured if I have to run the script and I make a mistake and it fails during a demo, then I'm going to look even more silly than I do already. So, it's not a risk I was prepared to take. Okay, so dealing with our broken promises is as simple as that. The only other two functions we'll look at will be processing our final promises. So a final promise that passes, as you saw previously, calls into our final pass, which again is going to do something very, very similar to the broken promise. It essentially does a check for a workflow, update, recall, and sets the workflow to recall immediately, unholds it if it's on hold, and sets a flag, adds a log. So again, out of the box, pretty simple stuff. But again, very customizable, and these are kind of the areas that we typically end up making changes for clients. And dealing with our final fail, out of the box again, we just treat any fail as a broken promise. But again, there may be some additional custom logic that you want to put in place for your clients. So we do have a function there available for you to do that. Okay, I guess we should probably have a quick look at some accounts in FinPower Connect, just to see what all of that stuff does once it's been run. Hi, Rebecca. And so if I look at 106, we have a look in our transactions page. So just a note here, you will need to switch on in your column chooser the following three columns: your promise status, and promise status icon. And in here, you'll be able to see quite simply that the script has been running as part of account processes. We had a payment due that got paid, therefore promises were passed. If we go back and look at a couple of others, you can see here instances of promises passing and being cancelled. Obviously, as we saw previously, promises get cancelled when another payment arrangement comes along and supersedes the existing one. And if we look back at 10000, you can see here some instances of promises that have not been paid. So we've got payment dues that weren't made. We had a fail. We had a second fail, which broke the promise. So as you can see, in our pat-prom script and our constants, our broken count was 2. That's obviously being applied in this case here. Initial fail, second fail, break. Okay, subsequent promises also therefore broken. So that's where these things, that's where the things that we changed in that script, basically via the user interface. Most typically you'd see them in here, but also from the payments screen, you would go to the payment arrangements tab at the bottom. You can see here a history of payment arrangements. You get a breakdown of all of your promises and things in here as well, which I'm sure all of you already knew. So finally, just to wrap up, I guess just some of the more common changes we have made or are asked to make to the script. As I say, it is used out of the box, but obviously it is subject to frequent change by clients wanting something slightly different, posting fees and things on failed or broken promises, and changing, probably the most fiddly ones are changing how the actual and expected overdues are calculated in our process promise due. So you can see here there's a block of code here. Probably the most complicated changes that we ever have to do are around what a client deems to be their actual overdue at the time and the expected overdue. So that can require a little bit of poking around, but as you can see here, it's a simple loop through the transactions to determine that stuff. So it's information you've got, just a case of changing some of that logic if need be. Other changes, typically starting workflows. Obviously, we have code in there already to process existing workflows, but actually starting new workflows, particularly overdues and things like that. And updating monitor categories, again usually via the broken promise or your final pass or final fail.